Welcome, 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 everybody, to another Sunday of When Black Women Gather. I am Helen Higginbotham. I'm the founder of this organization where we come together to discuss issues that are pertinent and relevant to specifically Black women, but often to the community in general. And today's conversation is one of those conversations where we have Black men and Black women in attendance. And our guest is Miss Sheila Brown. Hi, Sheila.
Greetings, greetings. I'm so honored to be here today. Is the audio pretty clear now? Can you hear me pretty
Yeah,
clearly?
I can hear you.
Okay.
We can. I think everybody can hear her fine.
Yeah,
And,
no
raise your hand
problem.
or
No
something.
problem.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
You all might remember
Well,
Sheila was with us in September 2023, telling us how to get ready for emergency preparedness.
Mhm.
And today she's here to talk to us about Amy. What's her full name? Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey. And she's going to share with
Yes.
us her presentation, Architect of Pan African Thought and Action. Miss Garvey is the spouse of Marcus Garvey, which is news to me, right? I did not know that. So I'm really interested in what she has to tell us. And I've spoken to a few people who also said the same thing. So this is going to be a great conversation. A little bit about Sheila before we get started. She is an attorney, author, inventor, and she's an Amy Jacques Garvey enthusiast whose dynamic presentation breathe life into history. She has been a featured speaker on college campuses and on When Black Women Gathered, international platforms, and community stages, where she uses a powerful blend of storytelling, historical data, and reenactments to offer fresh perspectives on legacy, law, and liberation. With a passion for connecting the past to the present, Sheila invites her audiences to see history not just as it was, but as a blueprint for what can be, which is very relevant for us now as we're dealing with issues of just everything that's happening around us. And this conversation today is fully intended to liberate, to uplift us, and to remind us of how we ourselves can be resistant and resilient in these times. And it's also in celebration of Women's History Month. And so Sheila is going to talk to us about, she invites us to reflect on women, not only as keepers of history, but as architects of legacy and resilient builders of the future. And on that note, Sheila has two companies that I want you to remember: Lighthouse Counseling Consulting LLC. She's president, and Sheila Brown Speaks. And she'll be dropping the information for you all, contact information for her in the chats. And feel free to reach out and have her come speak at your organization, or just to get more information, or and she can talk to us about the different types of consulting work that she does. So welcome, Miss Sheila.
Well, thank you again so much for that beautiful opening. I am so pleased to be here. I hope that I will make up for my technological defects with the presentation that leaves everyone feeling very good about who we are as a people, about how the Most High has been striving with us for the last 400 years, never abandoning us, but manifesting through some very powerful personalities that we know, and some of whom we should know and don't know as well, and some of whom we think we know, but we could use a little bit more insight about what it was that these people had. And so I am so honored today because of all the things that I love to talk about, and there's nothing that excites me more than talking about this Queen Mother, Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey. She blows my mind. Honestly, besides the liberation and my work that I'm doing, so I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but a lot of people don't know I'm also an attorney, and I just started my law firm. It's a Texas-based law firm. So when I'm not thinking about that, Mother Amy Garvey is always on my mind, because of the phenomenal, incredible contributions that this woman has made to the global and African, international, universal contribution level. Like, it's incredible what she has done. And what's more incredible to me is that so few people have given her the proper respect that she's due. For example, in my world, you don't mention the Honorable Marcus Garvey without mentioning Amy, the Honorable one, Euphemia Jacques Garvey. It's just impossible to do. One of the reasons is, and we'll get into that, is because almost everything that you know about the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey came from the diary of that profound Black woman. I call it a diary, but you all call it Garvey and Garveyism. This was the diary of a woman who just so happened to also be one of the most politically astute minds of the 20th century. Okay? So we're going to dive into that today.
Let me ask you something real quick. Do you have an earpiece that you can use for your phone? Because it's still a little muffled.
Earpiece? Like a microphone?
Yeah, because I don't know. I think your phone is, if it's closer to, yeah.
Okay, let me see if I get it. How is that?
Is
that
anybody else is she muffled for anybody else? Can you tell me, please? If just say on mute. Can you hear her clearly?
It's muffled. I can hear her.
It's muffled. Oh, somebody. So I guess it's mixed
It's
bag.
okay for me. Yeah.
Okay, well, go ahead. Go ahead, Sheila. I just don't want people to not get what you're saying because I can see and feel your passion.
Okay, so how about this?
I'm actually going to go off screen and leave it.
Is this a teeny bit better? Is this a teeny bit better?
Go ahead. I'm fine. I mean, everybody else can hear you. Maybe it's me, but go ahead.
Okay. So if it goes out or something, just let me know and I'll try something different. But I just pushed it up, so it's a little bit, it's not as low as it was before. But okay, so I'm going to bring the presence of the Most High into this conversation to help me with my technology issues, because what I have to say to you about Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey is so important. It's such an important motivating part, because sometimes I think people think about the Sankofa experience as something that we go back and fetch it and we just take a look at it and we put the picture on the wall and we go, wow, that happened. But really, as a strategic planner, I can tell you Sankofa is about not just going back and collecting data, but analyzing the data and then using that data, good or bad, productive or unproductive, scary or courageous, and using that to create the desired future. And in order to do that, we've got to dissect the past. We've got to analyze the personalities and the hidden clues, the code that they left us. And one of the people who left us some profound and prolific and insightful information is a woman who, quiet as kept, had almost everything it took to be what we would consider today an organizational development professional, okay? But when she encountered the UNIA after coming into the United States from Jamaica, when she met the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and had an opportunity to quiz him about his doctrine and its program, because she was a thinker. But let's back up for a minute, for 1 second, and let me just kind of set the stage for something that I think oftentimes gets underlooked. And this is the storytelling part that I'm talking about. So how many of you love stories? Anybody love stories? Okay, put love or something in the chat so you can know. If you love storytelling, just let me know. But one of the things that I think is so important to do, because a lot of us are visual people, a lot of us are auditory learners, and a lot of us are just soulful people, right? And so one of our greatest and creative arts as a people of African descent is the gift of storytelling. Because what we get to do is we get to travel through time. And I love traveling through time and meeting with these people and experiencing the world through their eyes. So what I want you to do for a minute is I want you to take a trip back with me through time. We're going to go into a very small parish in Jamaica where a young woman, a very beautiful, very dark complected, very gentle spoken, but very pregnant young lady by the name of Sheila Garvey is about to have a child. Now, this is important because Sarah knew something that the rest of us are really just starting to figure out. Sarah, while in birth pain, is still debating with her husband, Mr. Garvey, Mr. Marcus Garvey, which we would know as Senior, about what this child who is born under the sign of Leo, what his name is going to be. Mr. Marcus Garvey is a very proud man, very distinct man, very learned man, a man who is often very aloof, but he has a particular interest in the name of this child. And so Sarah, who usually is a little bit more giving into her husband's demands, is really adamant about this one thing. And that is, this child is special. This is going to be the 11th child. And if everything goes right, he will be only the second child to survive childbirth or being born to Sarah and Marcus Sr., if you will, and live beyond infantry, okay? So this is a really significant event for her. This is her second child, and she knows in her spirit that this is going to be a boy, and not just any boy. Something has downloaded in her spirit about the person and nature and character and purpose of this child, this boy child that she knows is a boy. And so she's made up her mind. From the divine, she's like, oh, this is a Moses. This is a Moses. I know it's a Moses. But Mr. Garvey, who also agrees that this is a special child, they don't know nothing about this child, but they know that there is something brewing, very significant inside of this belly. And so they end up coming to a compromise. And so on August 17th, 1887, the world received a man who would, a child, a baby, a boy who would become a man that we would now know today as the Honorable Marcus for his father's name, Moses for his mother's inclination, Garvey. But not just Moses, Mosiah. Marcus Mosiah Garvey was born. And as this child started to take in his environment, he didn't take very long. He was a very intelligent boy. Didn't take him very long to see that he was in an upside down, conflicted, hypocritical world where his race was at the bottom, always begging, always scraping, always hungry, always starving, always being downtrodden, always being dictated to, always the last, always the least. He could see that. And so he was making these very intelligent observations about his life and the world he had come into, and knew at a very early age that there had to be something done about this. And so one time he was sitting outside and looking over at the beach and looking at the ships coming in and looking and wondering, where are the people going? Why is the world like this? Why do we struggle so much? Why don't we have what others have? See, he had already had some encounters. Growing up, he used to play with one of the neighbors, and that one of the neighbors was a little white girl. And that little white girl would play with them all throughout their childhood, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As long as they could play, they were playing with her. And then one day, the little girl was told that she can't play with Marcus and the other little black kids anymore, that they were not good enough to play with her. And Marcus thought that this was his friend. He didn't understand why she can't play with him anymore. And so he started to learn the ways of the world really, really early. And he was asking questions, very important questions, that would lead us to a conversation that would eventually transform the entire global perspective about what people of African descent were capable of doing, what they could do, what they were willing to do, and how much they were willing to invest in order to see themselves as an independent African nation, a kingdom set apart for the re-glorification of a people. Okay? So, maybe on one of these days, he's around 8 years old, and he's sitting out looking at the ships, and he knows that he's got to play a pivotal role, but he doesn't know exactly how yet. And around this time, when this thought process is going on, something was also happening in the heavens, a conversation about when and how to send the second part to the equation that would solve the world's problem of global African liberation versus forever oppression. And so the solution, the resolution that came, arrived in the year 1895, almost 8 years after the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey is having his birthing into the world. And there's a woman by the name of Charlotte, and she too is now in labor pains. And there's a man, her husband. He's tasting something special is coming into the world, and he just knows it, and he's so proud that he is the father of this amazing gift to the world. And so on December 31st, 1895, the second half of the equation that the entire African body had been praying for since the start of colonial and the the Atlantic slave trade, there were prayers going up, cries going up. We need help, we need help, we need help, we need help, save us. And so in its fulfillment of time, and there had been others, but these two special dates, August 17th, 1887, the first half of the solution comes into existence. We call him Marcus Messiah Garvey. But the other half comes into the equation as well. And ironically, on the very last day of the year, Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey, although we know that Jacques is the proper French name, but if you've ever lived in a traditional Jamaican style family, which I grew up with a stepfather from Jamaica, and I lived with his mother, Grandma Vicky, and she would never say Amy Jacques Garvey, she would say Amy. And so, in respecting the simplicity and the dialect and the culture of the time, Amy Jacques Garvey preferred even to be referred to as Amy Jacques Garvey. So you'll hear all kinds of pronunciations, but from people who knew her personally, the consensus is that she embraced the version of Jake Garvey. Okay? So bear with us as we go through this story. Now, there's something really, really interesting about Amy Jacques and the relationship she has with her father. Now, Mr. George Samuel Jacques, he is a really, really industrious man. He is educated. He is political. He's politically aware, and he is very traditional. And so he raised his daughter up to have a very specific destiny. And one of that destiny was that she was going to grow up. She was going to know everything she needed to know about being an educated woman, a nurse, and she was going to learn to play the piano. And she wasn't that excited about learning how to play the piano. But when Baba George Samuel Jacques says you're going to play the piano, you're going to play the piano. So Mr. George Samuel Jacques was a very present father, and he loved his precious Amy, his firstborn, so much we suspect he may have wanted a boy, because Amy Jacques Garvey was raised to do just about anything a boy could do. She learned how to shoot guns. She was required to learn how to do analytical summaries of important international news. She was also inclined. How is this, you guys? How is this? Is this okay? Should I hold it like this? She was inclined to challenge others and to be very clear about what her opinion was in the world. She was not raised to be a passive young lady. She was raised to be a very pronounced, opinionated, and intelligent operative in the world. And so when Amy was around 6 or 7 years old, her father would hand her the newspaper. Amy, read this, he'd say. And she would read the article, and he would say, now tell me, what does this mean? And she would say, well, it means that China is going to be importing new products from the United States under their treaty. And so she would have to go through this ritual. And over the years, as she developed this analytical ability, this political astuteness, she would never shy away from challenging any man on her political perspectives, and she had plenty of them because she had been raised by one of the most political minds of the time. And not only that, which was very unusual for Amy Jacques Garvey, was that she received the kind of education that was very, very rare for women of the time in Jamaica of her particular class even, and they were considered middle class. Her great-grandfather was, I think, one of the mayors, the first mayor of Kingston, if not, I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that. Yes, that's right. And so these things all add up. So she's got this very prolific presence. She's articulate. She is a reader. She's an analytical person. And then something really, really interesting happens. She finishes her program, which I guess would be equivalent of first year college, last year high school. And she is about to make a decision about what next course of life is. And someone says, you know, Amy is really smart. And she had already taken up typing. She at least convinced her dad to let her take up what they call it, typing back then. Topography or something was the word for it. And so a lawyer, a friend of the family, was like, wow, Amy is really smart. She should come work in my law firm. And her father looked at that man and said, are you out of your ever-living mind? My precious daughter, Amy, this one right here, will never work around a law firm with you old groping, smoking, cursing men. Absolutely not. Well, shortly, unfortunately, later, not too long later, Mr. George Samuel Jacques passed away. And the attorney who handled his estate was also the attorney who thought Amy Jacques Garvey would be working in his office, would be a great kind of candidate for it. And let me tell you, Amy was really interested. She really wanted this position, but she did not challenge Mr. George Samuel Jacques when he said, you are not going to be working in the office. And so off she was prepared to go to nursing school, and I can assure you she was not interested in nursing school. So she learned the piano, she did her thing, she knew what to do, she knew how to interact and dialogue with her dad, she knew how to make him happy. But when he passed away, the opportunity presented itself again. And again, the attorney, now talking to Mama Charlotte, asked her, you really should give Amy an opportunity to come work at this law firm. She'll make money, she'll get skills, she'll be challenged. And then Amy gets her voice. You know how we can do with our mamas what we can't do with our daddies, young ladies? So she says, Mom, it's okay. I can do it. And I can be handling Dad's estate while I'm there because that was the lawyer that was handling the probate. Well, Mama Charlotte agrees. Amy gets into that law firm and she masters every aspect of that law firm. From the substantive part, she handled the insurance issues. She handled all of the legal secretary-related issues. She mastered the office for about 3 years. She worked there. And then something in her spirit said, but this is not where I'm supposed to be. And she set her eyes on the United States. And somehow, in 1917, around April, shortly, right after the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, in that same year, 1917, around March, they both end up in Harlem, New York. Two Jamaicans, 8 years apart in age, a destiny tied together, circumstances or spirit leads them both to Harlem, New York. Now, how is that for setup? Okay. Now, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, he's starting to take the platform. He's starting to, by this time, you guys know, he is the founder of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. He founded it while he was in New York, or while he was back in Jamaica. He traveled the world while Mother Amy was getting her education, and excuse me for being casual, I call her Mother Amy sometimes. But when Amy Jacques Garvey was, being educated and moving around, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was beginning to see the world. He had gone to several of the islands, like, where did he go? What was some of the islands? He's been to Belize, he's been to Peru, he's traveled almost all of the islands in the Virgin Islands. I think he's even been to Cuba, and then he went over into Europe. And every place that he went, Panama, Colón, Panama, he met incredible people, but the same circumstances he saw, the same exact oppression, the same treacherous behaviors, the same betrayal, the same politically ineptness that was happening in Jamaica. It wasn't just in Jamaica. It was everywhere Black people lived. And he couldn't believe that there was not a single place on the entire globe, at least the places that he went to, where Black people were in control of their own destiny. And he looked around the world and he was seeing that every respected government had its political leadership, it had its Senate, it had its religious leadership, it had, where's the Black man's president? Where's his king? Where's the Black man's queen? Where's their big men of renown? Where are their industries and their ships and where is ours? And so coming back to Jamaica after that sojourn around the world and beginning to encounter the works of Booker T. Washington, he read Up From Slavery, he decided, you know what? I don't know where it is, but I know one thing. I'm going to do something to create it. And he headed back to Jamaica, and he founded in 1914 the legal instrument that would become the vocal body, the body that would house the vocal and the economic engine of the race. Okay, not Jamaicans, the race. It will become a global movement. You all know it as the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or you should know it as that. Well, in Jamaica, he had a lot of challenges because Jamaica had a really big issue about racial hierarchy, but we know who was in charge. But there was also an internal racism, and they had a very sophisticated class system based off of how close you were to whiteness. So you had systems and degrees of pedigree based off of if you had a white ancestor as close as possible to your current generation. So if you were half white, you were in the highest upper scale at the very least. If you had at least 1/3 white, meaning like maybe your grandparent was a white person. So Jamaica was very, very skin color driven. And him being the dark skin complected person that he is, okay, now it's too loud. Him being the dark skin complected that he is, found it very difficult for him to make the kind of progress that he knew his program could be. And so he wrote a letter, believe it or not, let's start connecting the dots. He wrote a letter to Booker T. Washington, having heard about the Tuskegee Institute, and he said, that's it. That's the economic engine. I'm going to go to the United States, and I'm going to talk with Booker T. Washington and see if we can get this here in Jamaica, because I love what he's doing. He's doing something for self. So he wrote a letter, and Booker T. Washington wrote him back and invited him to come visit him in Tuskegee Institute. But unfortunately, the ancestor Booker T. Washington died before Marcus Garvey could get here. And so when he did get there almost a year later, he never forgot Tuskegee Institute. He never forgot the engine that inspired him, along with so many others who were already in what we now refer to as the Pan Africanist, or what some people refer to as the Back to Africa. It really just means kingdom. And what these people had gleaned is that in a society that codified laws to enforce and propagate racial caste, we're not going to be able to achieve freedom here. We're not going, you might get deliverance. That's the difference between being out of bondage. But getting freedom, the ability to move about, to exercise your destiny, they knew that that's not happening here. Not like this. We need to establish our own kingdom on the continent. They never intended for all Black people to live on Africa all the time and never anywhere else. That was not the mission. It was, we need a headquarters. We need a central government. Just like China is strong, as they say. Like I've heard Dr. Umar say, you need Chinese people are respected because China is respected, right? And so that was the premise behind, we need a place where we can get out of the belly of the beast so that we can create a reality where we are forced, if not compliant with, working with one another, respecting one another, honoring one another, and establishing our own intelligence systems, economic systems, educational systems, and then supporting the diaspora from that base. That was the premise behind what W.B.E. Du Bois and others misaligningly or maligningly, what am I trying to say? Disparagingly referred to as the Back to Africa movement. It wasn't exactly that in that way. You guys with me? Okay. So in essence, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey is here to follow up on meeting Booker T. Washington and now his successor and understanding how Tuskegee Institute operates, but also in exploring what can he do with a UNIA that's based in the United States, where the color of your skin mattered, but it wasn't as much of a barrier as it was in Jamaica, where there was a class of what he referred to as kind of like Negro peons or the Negro whites who believed themselves to be a superior group of people, even among the race. And it deprived them and depleted them of the opportunity or even the desire to want to uplift the race. Because as an individual, with my privileges, I can do well. That was his challenge in Jamaica. And so he was reaching out to the international world to see if there was another place where he could take root and grow. So that ended up being Harlem. Harlem was right for it. In fact, a lot of people love Harlem so much, and we love the movies about old Harlem, ancient Harlem, I call it. I did a tour of ancient Harlem and went to like 55 of the buildings that the UNIA owned in Harlem. It was a Black Harlem, and it was driven so much by the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and Euphemia Jacques Garvey and the supporters and leadership of the UNIA. And so that's the unspoken undercurrent in all movies about ancient Black Harlem, is that there was this movement that was driving the energy, changing the spirit, and moving people into a new way of thinking about themselves and their capabilities. Now, we're not saying that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was the only one, but he did a very important and distinct thing. What he did was he gave it international footing, and he gave it a mission, a vision, and a goal setting. He was a master strategic planner. Okay, so he's in the United States, and somehow between him doing what they call the corner speeches, like there was this position, you know, you guys know where that famous Black museum is, but it has a Jewish name. I always forget the Jewish name of it, but that if y'all know it, type it in there. The Schomburg Museum. So there, that corner right there, I think it's Lexington and some number 16 or something. Right there, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and other of his comrades, they would stand on that corner, stand on a platform that they would create, and they would just stand up there and talk and stop, and the people would just gather around and listen to this message. One God, one aim, one destiny. Why don't you have your own hospitals? Why don't you have your own governmental institutions? Why don't you? And he would just get up on that platform, and people would be intrigued. I never heard a Black man talk like that before. Or is it possible? And so he was starting to become invited. Even at this time, W.E.B. Du Bois was picking up, and they invited him to the visit the NAACP. And there was just a lot of curiosity about who is this gentleman, you know? And so at this time, Mother Amy is living in Harlem as well. And she's encountering the street speeches and going to some of the events. And on one occasion, she has an opportunity to approach him. Now, this is where the magic starts to happen. So she approaches him after one of his speeches in Harlem on a Sunday, and she does something very unusual for a woman that he's ever encountered. She started asking him some questions. How is your program going to work? How is it feasible? Why do you think that you would be able to do this? And what about this? And what about that? And how are you going to do that? And when is the financing out? And she, Lennox Avenue and Malcolm X, Malcolm X Boulevard, 135th, right at that corner. Thank you so much, beloved. And so right there at that corner, so I'm not sure exactly where he was giving this particular speech today, but she is drilling this brother. And he is like, yo, I've never even had brothers come at me like this. But he was intrigued by the intelligence. He was intrigued by the interest. You know, a lot of people, they come and they're, you know, oh, that was a great speech you gave, Mr. Oh, yeah, I really appreciate that, you know, and yeah, you're right. You're right, man. You got to do better. But this woman was listening. Okay? She was checking him. And she was asking very important questions. And he was intrigued. And so he said, you know what? I'm going to answer your questions, but you're going to have to come to the office when we have more time to discuss this. And so they made an appointment. She gets to come to the office, and he gives her a tour of the office. This is the early UNI headquarters, okay? And so Mother Amy Jacques Garvey, now remember, she just got finished working the entire system of a law firm in Jamaica, a very reputable law firm. And so one of the things she knew was that there are certain systems that needed to be in place in any organization, right? Checks and balances, like today we call it internal controls. If you're an accountant, or chain of custody, if you're in law, right? So he's taking her to the office, and she cannot believe her eyes, family. She is like, oh my God, sir, with all due respect, how do you expect to run an organization with papers all over the place? There's no filing system. There's nothing. You don't have. You can't just have these envelopes. They haven't been opened, right? So she's working in a law firm. She knows that every piece of mail has to be opened and stamped. You don't know if there's a notice with a default notice that has a deadline on it. You don't know if there's, you know, a tax liability or a summons for a court. Anything could be in there, right? So she's looking around and she's seeing a complete and total mess. There's no way any intelligent organization can run successfully like this long term. And she's like, my God, this is not going to work, sir. You've got to do something. You've got to organize this. You've got to put these files. You've got to create a system and a chain of custody. And, you know, and it's like, Amy, I know I need these things, but I don't have the people here who know how to do it. You gotta remember, this level of education was not something that many people in our communities had readily access to. You know, organizational development, you know, how to run an office, how to keep documents, how to code, all of these things. And so he then put the pressure on her. Well, you can see we have a need. You've heard my program. You were obviously impressed. You came back. Could you please come and help me? I am raising money. I'm always out of town. I need help. So she started to come in to volunteer. And the more she came in and got things incorporated, she instituted what was called the system, is what she refers to it as in Garvey and Garveyism, right? Now, what's interesting about Garvey and Garveyism, am I losing anybody? Are y'all still with me? Am I bored? Because, you know, I can get all up in my head with this. So, and I can't see the chat so well unless something pops up. But y'all with me here? Is somebody opening my mic? Are y'all together?
Here.
It's great information.
Great, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. So, what a lot of people don't realize, and I caught myself too, because when I was reading this book, I was so into the details of the story, like everything that is going. She documents everything about history. If you really want to get a perspective about what the world looked like for Black people, especially for Black women, in the 1900s, like 1910 to like 1965, you have got to read this book. But I don't mean just glance at it like elementary school read it. I mean like really read it. Because what's so surprising is that I had gotten so into just the introduction and the preface, because you know some of them have prefaces and it might be John Henrik Clark, and you're thinking, oh, okay, but the voice of the book, and I hate that I'm saying this in International Women's History Month, it sounded so masculine to me. I just assumed I was reading a man's voice, even the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey himself. Until I got to one page. And she's so brilliant, right? This is how brilliant she is. Because she knows y'all are sexist and discriminatory. When I got to the page where the first time she speaks in first person, because she speaks in third person the entire first, I think, 39 pages. The first time she uses the word I is on page 39. All right? The first time she said I. Now, I'm thinking to myself, well, who the heck was I? I'm going back to the pages and I'm like, who is I? Because this came, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, he's already passed away. Who is speaking? Is this her son? Is John Henrik Clark? Is this Tony Martin? Who is the reading? And then I realized I'm reading the voice of a woman. I was so ashamed of myself because it just seemed like I'm reading a man. Like, this is the man's domain. This is a man's voice. This is a man's perspective of the world, right? I'm so sick in the head, like y'all, sorry. But I'm thinking, this is a man. And then I was like, wait, And so I'm starting to go back and look at the pieces, and I'm like, well, who the heck was talking before this? And then I realized, oh my gosh, shame on me. The brilliant Euphemia Jacques Garvey knew y'all would stop reading if you thought it was a woman's writing. So she carefully draws you into the book, gives you all of the history, all of the foundation, gives you all this insight, and then she says, I. Brilliant. Yep. And so now you're seeing, oh my God, this is Mother Amy talking. Everything that I've been reading beforehand and everything that I will read that comes after is what she gathered. She kept meticulous documents. Remember the system I'm going to tell you about? She was a meticulous archivist. There was no newspaper article that related to Black people that she didn't read, preserve, and clip. She was always in the newspapers. In fact, one of the interesting things, you know, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was all over the country. And when he talked on international levels. He wasn't just talking about what happened in DC and Southeast last night, okay, like many of our leaders did. He spoke on every issue affecting Black people, okay? And so if there was a war in Russia, a war in China, if there was a war, it was on the subject matter because he understood that the world powers, all of them were actually, in all wars, were actually about the control of African resources. Every war, from Ukraine to ancient China, everything is about domination and control and who will dominate the continent of Africa. That's the unspoken underlying issue. And the people of Africa, whether we are in the United States, Jamaica, or wherever, we are considered a resource, not the people who own the land. So when you hear the French talking about Africa, they're not talking about what they refer to as Black Africa, which doesn't make any sense because how could there be any other kind of Africa, right? So politically, he understood that there was no issue happening on the international theater that would not have a direct or indirect impact on Black people, no matter where they were. And so there was no issue that he didn't get himself involved in, locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally. And because of that, he became an international threat. And because of that, Mother Amy Jacques Garvey, who eventually stepped into his shoes and did what he did every single day while he was incarcerated And every single day after he was released and after his unfortunate and early demise and loss of life, she did everything that he was doing. So we'll get into that. So she's entered into the UNIA system, but not working directly for the UNIA. Another important point these people often miss. She is working as his personal secretary. Eventually she's hired, but first she's volunteering. So she implements this system. Now this system is very sophisticated for a group of people who had, been working for the UNIA. Now, UNIA was very forward thinking and they paid folks very well. So we are deprived of a very important part of UNIA history. The UNIA had grocery stores. There were at least 13 in Harlem, restaurants, laundromats. They did their own dry cleaning. They had doll factories. They produced food. They imported goods. They managed. They had a transportation system. The UNIA was the massive experiment and one of the most successful, and it was awe-inspiring to the white folk who had never seen anything like it in all of their time, except for Wall Street in Oklahoma, right? But this one was so interesting because it wasn't just happening in Harlem. It was Universal Negro laundries, Universal Negro groceries, Universal Negro. So the nation owned these things. It was kind of like a commonwealth system. And they paid their officers very, very well. So much so that many people would come into the UNIA, take positions that they weren't qualified for or really didn't have an interest in. And then when they couldn't fulfill it or where they were challenged or they were put out of their position for being exploited or not doing what they were supposed to do, or sometimes even being suspected of sabotaging the organization, they would then go and sue for their complete salary. Now, a court system that sees Black folks mobilizing and organizing around economy and industry, well, at every chance they got, they would award judgment to that disgruntled employee. And the UNIA had dozens of defected, disingenuous, disloyal, selfish, Negro self-hating people that they had to pay on the payroll while paying the new people. And he paid very well salaries because he thought, if I want to have the loyalty of the people, if we want them to do their job, we have to pay them well. That was the premise, okay? And so he paid them very, very well, very high salaries, and they were doing things. They were doing big things. Now, kind of the legal issue that happened that kind of changed the trajectory of the organization was a little bit of sabotage, a little bit of manipulation, a little bit of playing on the vulnerabilities of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. It had a lot to do with, believe it or not, the NAACP, which was one of the chief opponents to the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And we'll dive into that because I know some of us we don't want to hear nothing negative about the NAACP, but we're not giving negatives, we're giving facts, okay? When this system was implemented, one of the things that happened was that Mother Amy changed the entire way that the UNI headquarters office was operated. Now remember, she was a part, the second half of the solution to a huge problem. And the instrument that would be used, the catalyst to address the need, because we're always talking about resources. If you've ever heard me talk about emergency preparedness, I'm always talking about resources. Well, that's what they were talking about. They understood what resources meant to Black people. That's why they started the Black Cross Nurses, which was an answer to the Red Cross, because these organizations, the missions may state one thing, but their spirit is driven by whoever is in control of the organization. And so in times of crisis, Black folks found themselves then and still to this day at the bottom of the hierarchy when resources are being passed out, okay? And so their solution to that, because these were solution-oriented people, right? Black men, you are just as capable of doing for yourself what others are capable of doing. That was his central theme. Do for yourself. You don't wait for other people to give you a handout. You do it for yourself. You organize, because one way or the other, you're going to be without. So organize yourself and believe in yourself and pool your resources and make moves so that you can control your own destiny. This was the first time that there was a universal voice, the vocal cord. We had a vocal cord, and it was reverberating throughout the entire globe. The Universal Negro Improvement Association had an email system, right? It was called the Negro World. That newspaper was the hottest thing since David Walker's Appeal. It was so deadly. That newspaper was that okay, let me tell you what Black people were hustling back then. We hustle drugs and stuff now, right? Black folks were hustling the Negro World paper because it was illegal in some countries to be caught when you could be executed. This is how dangerous the colonial powers saw the message and program of one God, one aim, one destiny through the Universal Negro Improvement Association, whose mission was universal confraternity. Universal confraternity. Universal confraternity, meaning that when you, no matter where you are in the world, see me, you don't see a Kappa, you don't see a Delta, you don't see what's some of the no, you see your sister. Just because I exist as a Black woman, that was universal confraternity of man. That's what they were aiming for. What has that been replaced with? Freemasonry, Black colleges and fraternities and sororities. But we had a program that encompassed all of us, where every single Black man, woman, and child was a part of a fraternity and sorority. And that was a child of God. That was the only requirement. And I had your best interest. Okay, but I digress. So anyway, once she implements this system, right, everything changes, because up to that point, poor the Honorable Marcus Garvey, that poor busy man, he had no real way of determining how many checks were coming in and what quantities. He was completely at the mercy of the integrity of whoever was coming through that office, and people were coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. And people just didn't have a spirit of unified dream enough to have the integrity to respect the fact that when a woman in Detroit was sending in her membership fee, that was a sacred token, that it should be honored and it should do what it was supposed to do and it should put her on the roll. They would pocket that money. No integrity, but also no systems of internal control. But that all changed when Euphemia Jacques Garvey got into the room, honey. She said, oh no, this is going to stop right here. And she implemented what she called the system. And that system, honey, the person who opened the mail, received the mail, was not the person who opened the mail. And the person who opened the mail was not the person who read the mail, who stamped the mail, who put the check or the register or next to the mail. She had everybody signing off on this chain of custody or this internal controls for cash. And people were pissed, excuse my language. But they were mad. The only people who were mad were the people who were exploiting the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And you need to know this history, because these are the things that make all of our organizations still so vulnerable to this very day. It's the same demons: a lack of integrity, a lack of self-control, a lack of dignity, and a lack of a desired unified goal to see the entire race uplift. We become so selfish that we are satisfied with just a few of us getting our needs met. We are just like them. As long as our soror or frat brother can get in, we don't care what happens to the rest of the race. We don't care about mass incarceration. As long as I can make it into the middle class and the upper class in the movies and get to where I want to go. We've forgot the collective unity, and this is why we're still struggling, and this is why many of us are going to have the biggest wake-up call we've ever had, but it is timely. Because what they were doing in the 1900s from 1914 up until 1944 when the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was trying to prevent what you are about to experience today. The race riots, the fires, the random, unjustified, but unvindicated killings and robberies and intimidation, the world is returning to the conditions it was in 1914 and 1917 and 1919, which was one of the what they call race riots in the country, the biggest ones, the most prolific ones. And it was only a race riot if Black men stood up with their guns and fought back. Okay, that was when they call it a race riot. What they were preferred to have it been is just some good old boys going through Black neighborhoods and terrorizing just for a few nights and just devastating the livelihoods of everybody there, lynchings and a few housewives, you know, left widows with little kids, you know, the system that had been created to ensure that there was always a clearly defined underclass. This is what these two were preparing to elevate the people from having to deal with. Now, once the system was implemented, okay, the first person got caught. And this is what changed everything for the Euphemia Jacques Garvey. And this is where her dad, this is why I say everything about this woman's childhood, everything about her upbringing and education, equipped her for the divine role that she was to play as the archivist, the supplemental vocal cords, and then the primary vocal cords after his death of the race, and then the organizer that she was, the political analyst that she was. Okay, y'all think we got some political analysts? Y'all don't know nothing. Those people, they couldn't stand in the same room with Miss Euphemia Jacques Garvey. Okay, so what she did exposed the culprit. It exposed the wicked. It exposed the thieves. And so, I caught him. She said the system was so effective that the very first person who tried it after she implemented the system was exposed immediately. She comes into that office of that man and she says, "Oh, excuse me, sir, I was just wondering, how can you justify the fact that of all of the processes in this chain of custody, yours is the only one that can't be accounted for, and there is a shortage of $350? If you don't get your bony little tail out of this office, I'll whoop you good." And that man threatened to throw her down the stairs. And she wasn't a bit phased of it, honey. She went and brought her pistol to work the next day and said, "I'd like to see you try it." She went straight to the board of directors and reported that Negro. And nobody tried to test her system like that as boldly as he did ever again. It was a powerful system. And what it showed is that everything in her past, her upbringing, her education, the law office experience, the dad, the political analysis, when the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and she decided that, and it wasn't out of necessarily romance or love, for those of you who are in your Housewives of Atlanta mode of thinking, well, wasn't he married to another Amy? Okay. No, what happened was Amy Ashwood, who is his first wife, from Jamaica as well, and he had to split ways. Amy Ashwood, God bless her soul, was another kind of person. She was kind of like my mom. She was not the kind of woman that you neglect. She was not long-suffering, like maybe somebody like me. I'm a long sufferer, right? I'm going to put up with a lot of foolishness because I see the mission, right? So Miss Ashwood, she was a very sensual woman. She was a very earthy woman. She loved her alcohol. She loved her lifestyle. She loved dressing. And one of the things that really agitated her about the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was his upkeep. Now, not the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey who would show up as president general or president provisional of Africa when they would have these grand parades. And let me tell y'all, family, you think the presidential inauguration where y'all have y'all daughters out here sashaying like pole dancers in front of, so I know I'm stepping on feet, no disrespect, but you got to see what we were doing in order to know how far we've come up, how far we've dropped. If you could imagine Harlem, New York, the entire, let's say 54 blocks, lined up with Black people to see a parade where Black men are dressed in uniform, military uniform. I'm going to show you the pictures, just to visualize it. White people were so confused. They thought when this procession was coming down 125th Street or whatever street it was coming down, they thought it was an African dignitary coming into the United States as a diplomatic concern. They were so confused. Women dressed in all white from head to toe, the Black Cross nurses. Children dressed in beautiful little uniforms. Everybody had a place in this march with the red, black, and green flag. It was a nation that people were looking at. The brothers carried swords. There were some men that were so proud of their UNIA uniform, they wore it every day. Y'all don't understand what we're missing out, the visuals. And then they would do this procession. People would be looking out their windows. People would be lined up in the streets. They did this procession every year. And it was a visual for Black people to finally see themselves in terms of nationhood. It was a sight to see. It was like the saints go marching in. It was like the Messiah's return, and this is what heaven looks like. Nobody had ever seen the likes of it because they were masters of psychology. They knew the importance of presenting kingship and queenship and royalty into the hearts and minds of a people who had only been seeing themselves portrayed as buffoons, portrayed in blackface, portrayed as maids, portrayed as servants or as criminals. This was something phenomenal and something so new, something so divine. They were making the uniforms themselves. That was unprecedented. And there are no movies about it. There's no plays about it. It is just the most incredible thing. It shook up the entire European global complex. They have whole conferences and meetings. I've been to the congressional, the Library of Congress. I've seen records, secret hearings at Congress and the Senate and the House talking about the threat of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, talking about the letters that he would write to senators, telling them what our aim and mission is, and if you hate us so much, then why don't you support this? Oh my God, it was incredible. He had no real concept of what was going on. And right at the front seat, right, there was the two seats in the front. There's a driver's seat. That was the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey driving this vision. He was the one that God downloaded the vision to. But there was someone on the other side who had a front row seat to every single event as it unfolded. And her name is Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey. Okay? Now, she is important because it is her who records these details, play by play. In the book, the movie script, if you will, called Garvey and Garveyism. And even before she wrote Garvey and Garveyism, which I think she first published in 1963, almost 20-something years after he died, she had already had the inclination to take her now husband's speeches, his poetry, his writings. He was not a single word of this book did he write. Not a single word of it. What you know about him, his inner thoughts, his childhood, the thoughts of his parents, the conversation, that came from this woman's book. He did not discuss that with you all. That came through his life. And what's very interesting, yeah, thank you, brother, for the movie. Right? And I stand corrected. There is one movie, or maybe two or a few, but there should be significantly more. But I digress. What this woman recorded for us is the missing piece of history that really isn't missing. We're just ignoring it at our own detriment, because everything that she wrote, and she not only was she an archivist, what she was doing was every time he would give a speech, every inner thought he had, every conversation that they had, she would started to collect them. And she was just doing it for herself initially. And then one day she said, you know what, I want to share this with the world. She's so sharing and so thoughtful. And so she decided that she was going to publish, with his permission, you know, his inner thoughts, his speeches and his recordings and the things that people were saying about him and these things. And so she collected it, and it became the very first volume of Philosophy and Opinion, which I don't have with me here. But that was really her first introduction to the world as the archivist, the historical archivist. She was collecting the database of knowledge that would prove to be very pivotal, because the forces that be that controlled the media, let's say the MSNBC and Fox of the time, the things that they had to say, including what was the NAACP's paper, the critic, what's it called, the critic, the crucial, the critic?
Crisis. The crisis.
The crisis, yes, thank you. I knew it was a C. The crisis. They had such horrible things to say about the Honorable Marcus Garvey. They were making him look like some kind of a madman. And they weren't just attacking, thank you, beloved. They weren't just attacking, I'm talking about NAACP, National Association for the Colored People. They weren't just attacking his program. They were attacking his nose, his cheekbones, his jawline, his hair. They were referring to him as a monkey, a broad-nosed, black-faced Negro, uneducated. I mean, the things that this Black man's program brought out the worst in Negroes, who felt that this was their time to shine in leadership. You know how the Most High always chooses the person that everybody least expects to play the divine role in the world? They don't look like what you think your leadership looks like. You might be looking for Adam Clayton Powell, you know, very distinctive looking, charismatic, smooth talking, just captures your attention and your eyes. You never goes for that kind of a person. So everybody seemed to have had an issue with his physical appearance. He had very African, if you will, features. And that was a problem for W.B.E. Du Bois. Who do you think you are? You know? So interestingly enough, this system that Mother Amy implemented revealed the culprit. It catapulted her to another level, and then he started to ask her to take on more responsibility. Now, eventually, he hired her as his personal secretary. Now, this is where she really gets to get a deep insight look at the runnings of the entire organization. She's his personal secretary. So she's helping to keep him organized. She's organizing his calendar. She's keeping him straight. She's, you know, putting out his fires, organizing his trips, doing all of these things, right? And all of these events are going on, and he is moving throughout the country. He is moving, honey. He is going from the north to the south, from Kansas to, they had UNI headquarters in almost every region of this country. And guess what country had the largest number of UNIA members? What country? Cuba. Cuba is recorded as being the largest concentration of UNIA members in the records. Now, we don't have a lot of our records because once the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, now this is also, so every major event also relates to Mother Amy Jacques Garvey. So I can't tell the UNIA story without telling the Amy Jacques Garvey story, and I can't tell the Amy Jacques Garvey story without telling the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey / UNIA story. They're all interconnected. You do not have a UNIA, and I hate to say this for some of the brothers who would like to dismiss her as just kind of a bedside creature, but you do not have a UNIA as you know it without having an Amy Jacques Garvey as you don't know it. So interestingly enough, the event that kind of shifted the relationship between Mother Amy Jacques Garvey and the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey has a lot to do with the shift. You guys heard about the ships and the conspiracy that the United States government brought against the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey on claims, illegitimate claims, bogus claims really, of mail fraud. It was a very weak case, but its precedent was stemmed from not just the low level of evidence that they had, which was not even, today probably wouldn't even be entered into evidence when I think about it, but it was the verbal testimony of a man who worked in the UNI headquarters, came to find out he was a, what do we call those people when the FBI hires someone? They're operative, like not a FBI agent, but they are like a informant. So they had lots of informants inside the UNIA stealing data, stealing money, planting things, collecting evidence, gathering information, trying to find. They were so cruddy that they even hired a Black man to follow the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and Mother Amy Jacques Garvey to a hotel that they were booked at for an engagement he was supposed to speak at to see, check this, if she and he went into each other's rooms. Why? That was prostitution at the time. That's how treacherous it was. Thank God these people were people of integrity, and she had her own room and he had his own room. But this is the level that they would go to in order to undermine his efforts. So the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was being coerced in some ways or influenced in some ways or kind of challenged. Well, man, if you're really serious, why don't you get these ships? We need to get ourselves out on the sea. Now, they really weren't ready to put ships on the sea. However, he was constantly being antagonized by whatever decisions he made or didn't make. And so the claim was, oh, you're not big enough. You're not really serious about liberation. You know, if you really were, you'd put these ships on the sea. There was certainly a need. Black people were really, really suffering in travel, you know, on the trains. You know, I had a sister friend who did a play about these, I think it was Mama Ivy Wells related. She's the great niece of Ivy Wells. But what happened was, you know, we would have to pay the same expensive, like, what do you call it, like business class coach to get on the train, only to be put at the bottom or the back where the cows were. You know, no beds, just hay, and it's very, very, whatever Amy Jacques Garvey called indignities, right? So, speaking of indignities, I'm going to share this with you too in a second. So he and she were dealing with a very important decision. It would certainly change the trajectory of the way the world saw Black people and their political astuteness, their economic capabilities, to put some ships on the sea. So he was having these internal conversations with Mother Amy and his internal team, which would include very important people, Henrietta Vinton Davis, some of his students that later became his students, things like that. Very powerful loyalists, right? And the issue was, if he didn't agree to put ships on the sea, yes, Mama Cos, if he didn't agree to put ships on the sea, it would be a form of incompetence, of impotency. And so people were saying, antagonizing him, saying, oh, you just want to, you know, take money back to Jamaica for your monkey country. You know, that's what they were accusing him of, doing all kinds of wrong things with the money. So he accepted the challenge before it was time to put ships on the sea, and he made some investments based off of limited information, because we're often entering industries with limited information. The whole industry set up, the maritime laws have already set up. It's been, you know, 700 years in the making, the Moors and the British, and they've been colonizing seas, and we're just trying to enter the market. And so he ends up buying the first ship at a really, really expensive price, for more than it was worth. And they put it on the sea, they repaired it, and they called it the Frederick Douglass. And it was a powerful scene. I mean, Black people were enthusiastic. They were ecstatic. We are going to have our own ships on the sea. So there was like this undercurrent of greatness and at the same time looming doom with almost every major financial decision. But that ship did get on the sea, and about 3 other ships were purchased. And every single time they were sabotaged because we didn't have very many Black loyalists who would oftentimes serve the crowd. So there was all kinds of treachery on the ships. And to give you another sideline of history, the NAACP was so disturbed and opposed to the Black Star Line, which is the Frederick Douglass, and all the other ships that they were doing. So they started a campaign about, blemishing him. But W.B. Du Bois, God bless his soul, his misguided soul at the time, he corrected, and he and Mother Amy Jacques Garvey later reconciled after his death. And she did so under the advisement spiritually of her husband, which is another topic. But he commissioned the United States to ask the United States to counter the Garvey movement by giving him and his comrades ships. And they were like 40 please. So he didn't get to do that. At the same time all this is going on, we have an international stage. Now, ironically, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey never stepped foot on the continent of Africa, but he stepped foot every single place else, Europe, the Caribbean, the South America. He was all over. Now, once the ships got on the sea, that gave the federal government a little bit of an into the inside of the organizations, and it elevated his dangerous level, like the barometer. It elevated him to cold red, okay, in the United States internal systems, which didn't have a central intelligence agency yet. But I assure you that the catalyst for the CIA and all of the alphabet boys that we have today was singularly the Universal Negro Improvement Association and its international scope, okay? So Mother Amy Jacques Garvey, Mother Amy Jacques Garvey is watching all of this unfold, and she's recording the events. And it is because of her insights that we now know that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was under this pressure, and he decided to go ahead and put the ships on. And he struggled with the captains and the people because they were being paid. They were being paid by operatives in the government to sabotage. So they would do things like pour salt water inside of the ship's internal engines to cause the ships to get, lodged and need repairs. And then they would take cuts from the companies, that would do the repairs. And then on another occasion, they were taking, and because white companies were also using our services, so he was able to take white exports out of the country and do that. And then he was creating a system, so they had like a portion of the ship devoted to cargo and to usury, so they would be able to charge people for shipping things, but they would also have people on the ships. And I tell you, when people would see those ships coming in, they would be waiting in masses, like most of us or y'all wait to see a Beyonce concert. That's what Black people were doing. When that Black car line would come, the people would just lose it. I mean, they were throwing roses and flowers and dancing and hallelujah and clapping. It was when they say racial uplift, the singular person that we can point to was the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. That's why Dr. Martin Luther King himself even said that man changed the entire trajectory of the mind of the Negro race of Black people. And so now enter in Attorney General Edwin Shero. I think this is his name, Edwin Shero. I've got 1,000 names moving through my head, and it's been a while since I've had the opportunity to do a presentation. So just take the names that I'm dropping at a grain of salt and focus on the message. So Assistant Attorney General, we'll call him Edwin Shero, or Edwin Shero, I think it is Kilroe. He has an infiltrator inside of the UNIA headquarters, and they are devising a plan whereby they are going to, because remember, how he's raising money is by selling stock to Black people. They were selling stock, like $5 stock, and everybody was able to own into these companies. And so, there's international law And a lot of laws we don't even know about until they charge us with it for being too bold in our ambitions. So on one occasion, Mother Amy Jacques Garvey and the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey are traveling by train, and a Black man approaches the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, a stranger, and he says, "Man, my sister, man, she really wants to get one of those shares, man. Can I give you the money right now?" And he says, "Oh man, I don't have my registrar. I can't really do this right now." And he's like, "Oh, come on, man. My sister really wants this." And he's pressuring. You know how difficult it is to avoid taking a sale when you go on a mission and you got a sale. But he said, "Let me give you the number to the office. Go ahead and send the check in to her." Well, just that exchange right there allowed for the federal government agents that were also on the train to arrest the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and make him miss his speaking engagement because of a federal law called the Blue Sky Laws, which makes it illegal to cross federal or state lines selling stock. It was a part of the setup, okay? So they were doing things like that. They also built their case around the infiltrator who claims that he had a piece of mail addressed to him from the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey himself selling stock in the Black Star Line and other ships. No such letter existed. That's why Mama White is exactly sabotaged. So why is this important? Why harsh on the details? Because Mother Amy Jacques Garvey is the one who is recording all of these events and telling us how the enemy unfolded our powerful program for economic independence, political independence, spiritual and cultural independence in the United States. It was a profound movement, and it was the only thing everybody ever talked about. And so on occasions like that, this is where I said she was able to step into his shoes, they had a hive mind. You know what I mean by hive mind? She knew his thoughts so well, he knew her thoughts so well that they could finish each other's sentences. So when you were hearing the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, you were hearing her. And when you heard her, you were hearing him. And she had a vocal voice. It was the editorial that she was managing in the Negro world called the Women's Page, where she spoke on women's real issues, women's political issues. In fact, would y'all like to hear one of the articles that she wrote? Anybody want to hear an article she wrote?
Yes.
It says, this is what's so interesting about Mother Amy Jacques Garvey. Remember I said she worked at a law firm? She really quite kept was an unauthorized lawyer. She thought like a lawyer. She wrote like a lawyer for her time. Like she would always start off with an issue rule conclusion kind of analysis, right? So this is why it's so easy to follow her train of thought. Every piece of writing kind of had this logical sequence, right? So she was writing these articles, and when she stopped writing the Women's Page, I think it was, she did the Women's Page for about 3 or 4 years, she started to do, more articles on her political views, on economic issues. And I wish I had some water, I forgot to get my water. Yep. One of the issues that she had with women was that no matter how hard she tried to get sisters to send in articles, she just could not get them to do it. She would have very few supporters, and she wanted the Women's Page to be not just a beacon for women, but for men in our community to understand that we are not sidelines, that we're not just something you set aside apart to only deal with cooking issues and cleaning issues and, the gathering the orphans and things like that. We had a political voice. We mattered in the conversation. And she wanted everybody to know that, the world to know that. And so she wrote this article for women in the Women's Page. And the article was called, Women as Leaders. Okay? Powerful article she had written. And in this article, I have it memorized. I just want to make sure I have it here in front of me in case it's been a while. All right, so she's calling on me to just go with it from the heart. Well, all of her articles really read like speeches. This is what she said. The exigencies of this present age require that women take their places beside their men. White women are gathering all their forces and uniting regardless of national boundaries to save their race from destruction and to preserve its ideals for posterity. White men have begun to realize that as women are the backbone of the home, so can they, by their economic experience and their aptitude for details, participate effectively in guiding the destiny of nation and race. No line of endeavor remains close for long to the modern woman. She agitates for equal opportunity and gets it. She makes good on the job and gains the respect of men who heretofore opposed her. She's not afraid of hard work, and by being independent, she gets more out of the present-day husband than her grandmother did in the good old days. The women in the East, both yellow and black, are slowly but surely imitating the women of the Western world. And as white women are bolstering up a decaying white civilization, even so, women of the darker races are sallying forth to help their men establish a civilization according to their own standards and to strive for world leadership. Women of all climes and races have as great a part to play in the development of their particular group as the men. Now, some readers may not agree with us on this issue, but do they not raise their children, the future men and women? From time immemorial, women have been raising their children, educating them, and instilling in them the possibilities of hope and dignity and race. Women, therefore, are extending this holy experience outside of the home, softening the ills of the world with their gracious and kindly contact. Now, some men may argue that the home will become broken up and women will become coarse and lose their gentle appeal. We do not think so, because everything can be done with moderation. The dull baby kind of woman is a thing of the past. The wide-awake woman is forging ahead, prepared for all emergencies and ready to answer any call, even if it be to face the cannon on the battlefield. New York has a woman Secretary of State. 2 states have women governors, and we would not be surprised if within the next 10 years, a woman graces the White House in Washington, D.C. Women are also filling diplomatic positions, and from time immemorial, women have been used as spies to get information for their countries. Now, white women, they have greater opportunity to display their abilities due to the standing of both races and due to the fact that Black men are less appreciative of their women than white men. The former were more readily sing the praises of white women than their own. Yet who is more deserving of admiration than the Black woman? She who has endured the vigors of slavery, the deprivations consequent on a pauperized race, and the indignities heaped upon a weak and defenseless people. Be not discouraged, Black women of the world, but push forward regardless of the lack of appreciation shown you. A race must be saved, a country must be redeemed, and unless you strengthen the leadership of vacillating Negro men, we will remain marking time until the yellow race gains leadership of the world, and we be forced to subservience under them or extermination. We are tired. We are tired of hearing Negro leaders say, there's a better day coming, while they do nothing to usher in that day. We are becoming so impatient that we are rushing to the front line to serve notice on the world, that we will serve notice on the world, that we will take all the leadership for ourselves, and we will, using prayer on our lips and arms prepared for any fray, we will take on the warship and lead on to victory in battle. Mr. Black man, watch your step. Ethiopia's queens will not be dumb. Sorry, I got distracted by the finger pocket. Mr. Blackman, watch yourself. Ethiopia's queens will defend her shores and people. Strengthen your shaking knees and move forward, or we will displace you and lead on to victory and to glory. So that was an article that she wrote in 1925 in the women's page of Negro World. It was an article. So her articles read like speeches. And she was one of the most prolific speakers that even white women would say, I have never heard such an eloquent and impassioned woman speak like that. She was invited to speak, and unfortunately, they would often limit her to 15 minutes. Right? So this took on a new dimension for her when in 1925, right after they got married, because the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey could foresee that something was about to go down and he might lose his freedom. And in the event that that happened, there were very few people that he could trust to run the leadership of the UNIA, except for someone who could step into his shoes and carry out his mandate. And that would have to be his wife, but they weren't married. So he invited her into a marriage based on the circumstances of leadership. But she says the exigencies of this present age, the circumstances require you, she would say, to stand up and take positions beside your men, not behind them. She said beside your men, right? And then she goes on to talk about, well, white women are doing it. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there was an argument there for the group who refers to themselves as foundational Black Americans. Right? This was a woman from Jamaica. She made no distinction between a woman from Harlem and a woman from Trinidad. There was no such distinction in her mind. Those were the petty differences that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, that were his Achilles heel. These superficial distinctions between us based off of where the oppressor had us land and what language we were speaking and what shape our nose was, those were the things that drove our organizations into madness. She made no distinctions based off of those things. She didn't understand the concept of a Trinidadian woman or a Harlem, New York woman, or we were all in the same boat. We were all sinking at the bottom. And so she would say, listen, white women are rallying all their forces regardless of their national boundaries. Why? They had one mission: to save their race from destruction and preserve its ideals for prosperity. Why can't we set aside our superficial differences and do the same thing? It's the same distinctive argument that people were making back there. That's it. And that was her solution to it. And I wholeheartedly agree with it to this day. It doesn't mean you ignore your local issues. It just means that you don't have to focus on the trivial issues. Your chief enemy is not a Nigerian coming here taking a scholarship. That's not your biggest concern, right? So these are some of the issues that still make her so relevant to this day, right? Now, you talk about relevance. Who are the players on the global war theater that's playing out right now in the United States, right? China, Russia, United States, and Europe. Listen to this. Africa bides her time. February 5th, 1927. I decided to write this article because I wanted the people to pay attention to the fact that we at the Universal Negro Improvement Association, that we were already preparing the people's minds for this. So listen to this article that I wrote. It takes some big physical demonstration to make some Negroes appreciate the necessity for and worthiness of the program of Garveyism. The Chinese War, now being waged, has done it. 10 years ago, when Marcus Garvey started his crusade and informed a warring world that peace could only be brought about when each race, group, and nation learned to respect the rights of the other. And that if Europeans claimed Europe as their exclusive possession, so should Asia be for the Asiatics and Africa for the Africans. He was laughed at by some Negroes and dubbed a dangerous man by European land grabbers. Today, the slogan, Asia for the Asiatics, created by a black man, is the war cry of millions of oppressed Chinese who are letting Europeans know and feel that their home is in Europe, unless they are willing to be governed by Chinese. Today, thousands of white people are packing up bags and baggage and leaving China for the Chinese. Hundreds of years of prayers, petitions, and appeals made no impression on the powerful nations of Europe who were busy exploiting China. But less than 1 year of fighting made them decide to leave China alone to work out their own destiny. Under the caption, "Wanted, Fight for It," Mr. Arthur Brisbane of Hearst Publications writes, "If you want anything in selfish civilization, fight for it." China started fighting, and Europe suddenly becomes polite. Russia wishes China well. Russia wishes China well, thinks she should rule herself. Asia has learned what Africa is now learning, that what is worth living for is worth dying for. But Africa is not asleep. She is in the organization period, uniting her tribes, linking hands with her scattered children in all parts of the world, and instilling in their minds the love of race and the love of country. It is a great task, but once the task is done, the battle will be comparatively easy. For what human forces can be successful in defeating 400 million well-trained Negroes? They had better sense than to try such an unequal conflict. They will yield as gracefully as they yielded to the Chinese. Africa will be redeemed, perhaps without the shedding of blood. But in the meantime, Africa bides her time. And from the ocean strand, all jungle, mountain, vale, and need, the sweet word unity will speed on wings of wind and rule her fretful folk into one dream, one heart, one hope, and yet again, she'll claim her sacred right to rule herself apart from the alien right. But if once more the pale-faced man shall see, not yet, thou backward race, he's thine to pay. I quake to think how sore the arms shall hurl thundering terrors at a grasping world when Africa awakes. That was a beautiful article that she wrote in February 5th, 1927. What year are we in right now? This is 2025, and the global theater is set with the exact same players. Are we having a global century-level deja vu here? Am I the only one seeing this? China fights European powers, including the United States, for domination and control. Asians used to be our friends, you know. They used to empathize with us. Japan once rejected a United States business deal because of the way they were treating African Americans. China was observing it. The Vietnamese was asking black men, "Why are you fighting us? You're just like us," right? The world has shifted so much in the last 100 years that it's completely unrecognizable. We don't have to talk about our dynamics. You see it all the time in the news, the relationship shift between the Asian community and the Black community, the disrespect, there's been a shift, right? They called it the Brown and Black Alliance or the Yellow, Black, and Brown Alliance that Adam Kate and Powell and even Malcolm X, they were even holding forums, right, about what these groups, these marginalized, oppressed groups of a different world. But one of the things that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said is that don't put too much dependence on relationships and partnerships with other nationalities and races because they're only temporary until they achieve their end or their means, and then they will throw you away and betray you. Okay? So, interestingly enough, these same players are right back here, and this was 1927 that she wrote this. In just 2 years or less, we will be hitting 1927, and the same Russia-China dynamic against Europe dynamic is still on the table, right? And Africa is still on the table for its resources by all of those entities now. And so there's some lessons to be learned here. Now, remember how I told you that she would read articles as a little girl, 7, 8, 9 years old, and her daddy would make her stand up and give her political analysis? This is what you see in her writing. It's a continuation of that gift, that discipline that she instilled, and this was her gift to the world. A lot of Black people, even in the early 1900s, weren't able to even afford sometimes newspapers that had international scope, and they relied on the Negro world. The Negro world was the Facebook or Instagram or TikTok of the day. Everybody wanted it. Everybody needed it. It was your binoculars to the world, and it was so deadly that it was banned in several African continents and in several South American countries. So keep that in mind about how prolific and powerful that was. Now, is that on point? Now, I don't know if you noticed at the end where she actually incorporates some of her poetry, where she says, in the meantime, Africa bides her time, and from the ocean's sound, all jungle mountain there and need the sweet word unity will speed on wings of wind, and through her fretful folk into one dream, one heart, one hope. It sounds familiar? One God, one aim, one destiny. I told you they started to think and talk alike. And yet again, she'll claim her sacred right through Africa to rule herself apart from the alien right, whether that was Asian, alien, or European Asian, right? But if once more, we're confronted by the white man who says, not yet, you backward race. That was a theme back then, backwardness, right? It wasn't meant to be an insult about one's intelligence, but it meant to say, in a world that is changing as rapidly in industry and technology, we are in no position to be dealing and thinking like little towns and little clans that defines what we think of when we say, I'm African today. We want to go back to our connections and want to connect with the people in this particular region. If the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey had his way, there would be no such thing. I mean, he wasn't determined to destroy, individuality, but what he wanted was a United States of Africa as a headquarters, starting with Liberia, which was sabotaged once again with the help of WBWG, NAACP, and our wonderful comrades in the Alphabet Boy Nation. And so the ambitions of these people was outrageous. It needs to be talked about, it needs to be understood, and it needs to be analyzed. But enter the phenomenon where Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey and her husband, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, are on the train, and somehow the telegram gets to them that he's been summoned. His lawyer reaches him and says, listen, this is a setup. I know you're out on bond, but they're saying you've got to be back in court tomorrow, or they're going to send the officials for a warrant arrest for you. So they book all the way back to New York to get to this court case. And everything is in place for Mother Amy, she's now his wife, to step in and to step into his shoes if in fact he does get arrested. So he did get arrested, And that's when the things go out of trial. But when he goes to trial and they actually convict him of mail fraud, then her world really starts to change. She's not just a passive voice in the women's editorial page or the article. Now she's the one traveling the world on his behalf, because right from jail, he's getting an itinerary ready for her. Saying, you're going to go to Louisiana, and then after that, you're heading to Mississippi, you're going to head back to New Orleans, and you're going to come back up to Georgia. And he would have her lined up to give speeches. She became his vocal cord, okay? So not only did she have to uplift the people who were devastated by his arrest, this was our, if you will, Black Messiah of the day. And his arrest possibly meant the end of this empire that we were creating under his leadership. They finally caged the tiger, as attorney Edwin Shero, I know I'm not saying his name right, as he said to the jury in their instructions, in their final instructions, do you want to be the one responsible for letting the tiger loose? That was told. Like, please don't let judicial discretion and justice confuse you. You will pay a price if this man isn't convicted, okay? You could lose your life. So the jury almost had no choice but to convict him, right? These are the underpinnings of justice that are going on even to this day. And so he went to jail. They took him to, well, he was in jail in New York initially. And here's what's really, really phenomenal. I'm going to share this story with you, and then I'm going to open it. Do we have time? I'm sorry, is it almost 6 o'clock? God, I've been talking that long. Okay, I'll stop there. Helen, what do you want to do? Do you want to open it up for questions or anything? Or?
Yes, let's do that. Thank you. I see from the chats and people still hanging out here. This has been very interesting and informative. So yeah, so anybody who has questions, feel free. I had trouble hearing. I don't think anybody else did, so that's good. I was in and out. I guess most of it though, so I'm glad to say that.
I didn't even get, and I just want to say this. I didn't even get to half of the details about her contributions to the UNIA, but we have to have more talks like this about Mother Amy Jacques Garvey and him, because I can't tell a story about her without him, but it's really, really interesting because there's so much more to unpack. And I feel now, I had no idea we had already lost that much time. God, I apologize.
Fabulous. You held everybody's interest. I'm happy. And I don't know if I missed it, but what sparked your interest in Mother Amy, as you call her? Was it something special, or I don't know if I missed that or not.
Oh, that is such an interesting question. It's kind of like a series of events. Well, I spend a lot of time in books, and I'm completely obsessed with the ancestors, particularly Frederick Douglass and his mother Harriet Tubman. Like all of the major greats, I have like a whole dining room wall with all of their pictures. They're like, that's my family for real. So there was a couple of events that happened, but I took a course on revolutionary Pan Africanism. I was very interested in the topic. Thank you, Belinda. And it was with Dr. Umar. Some of you might know him, some of you might not, some of you might loathe him, some of you might adore him. But he gave this one class, and it was really, really engaging class. We went to all of these sites where these historical ancestors were, Frederick Douglass, New York, and we studied very intently these people. And I was the #1 student in the class, if you can imagine. Like I aced every test. We had real quizzes, real tests, real, presentations. And so the reward was, for being #1 in the class, I got to choose the ancestor to do the final presentation on. And it seemed like only a natural extension. And the funny thing was, I don't even think once in the class did we even talk about her. And it was a whole course on just global Pan-Africanism. So it wasn't just the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, which could be why. So I chose Amy Garvey. I wasn't really thinking anything else from it. I was just like, I want to know some more about her. Changed my life. It changed my life because once I started getting into the book, I started seeing the lines in between the lines. Like when she writes, she has these codes in there. And the reason I say it's a diary is because while you're learning all this history about the UNIA and about the events that were happening, about the co-conspirators and about the inner thoughts of the king and the things that they were doing to combat those issues and the money struggles, she would make these poignant and very controversial. And I'm like, hold on, Queen, did you just say that? And they're all, I call them the little secret codes in the book. And I was like, I mean, reading, and I'm like, did she just say that? And I was like, let me go back and read that again. She just said that. And there are all these little statements that are embedded in the book. That's the diary portion of the book. The rest of the book is historical context. But when she would write these little statements, it would also resonate with me. Okay, I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about my history than I usually prefer to do. When I was 18, I was really 17, I was introduced to a man, a teacher, we used to call him the master teacher, some still do, Dr. Malachi York, right? And he had an organization that was known popularly back then as the Ansar community or the HTM. If you ask my dad, it was a cult. If you ask my grandma, it was hell on earth, right? So they were not happy about my involvement, but I got so enthralled in the teachings because this was the first time, and I had a lot of questions growing up. If y'all were like me, grew up watching Shaka Zulu and Dr. King for Black History Month, right? So when I was a girl, I used to watch that Dr. King thing. I would be like, that was so messed up. Like, why did that have to happen? And I would be thinking about Dr. King for like a whole month. And the Shaka Zulu story was like, those were the only two. Y'all remember back in like the early 90s and late 80s when those were, you got every Black History Month, you got the Shaka Zulu story and Dr. King. So I would be watching those, they would just be I'd be messed up for the whole month. So I was thinking, so I had all these questions, and Dr. York was the first person to answer the questions to my satisfaction. And I moved into his community, and I experienced something that many people will never get to experience, which also informs the work that I now teach on emergency preparedness. But he introduced topics in ways that no one had ever done before. He answered questions about race, questions about class, questions about spirituality, questions about God. I ain't saying that y'all would agree with it, right? But he was the first person to address the issue. And the way he ran the organization, it required everything from you. This is where the classification of a cult comes in for many people, because it made people feel like, you gotta give up all that? This is okay for your family? Yeah, stop. I can understand why people would think that. It was a part of my spiritual journey. I personally had to see that, so that when I would read Mother Amy Jacques Garvey's writings, it would resonate with me in a very different way, because I understood what that level of leadership requires of people, how it takes over your whole life, and how you have to be long suffering, you have to be connected to something bigger, but you lose so much of yourself as a woman. You lose your sense of ego, you lose your sense of self-determination, you lose your sense of self-ambition, because this is a male-dominated organization, and your role, just like the men who wrote to Mother Amy Garvey after Marcus Garvey's incarceration, they wrote this really disparaging letter, challenging her in an indirect way, saying that she's a helpless woman and she's not the leader of the organization. And it's an insult for y'all to call her the leader, or that she would even aspire to be the leader of the organization, because we think men, we run this, And so she was like, excuse me? Are you kidding me? So she was highly insulted by it. And this was a public letter that they published to undermine her and insult her, because she was technically the leadership. Now, it was also interesting that the Honorable Marcus Garvey did not want her to become president of the UNIA for whatever reasons he held. He gave her his reasons, and she clearly, if you read Garvey and Garveyism, didn't find them to be satisfactory, but that was her husband, and she did what he said. So I could relate to being leadership, but having to suppress it. Being financially abused, if you will, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but Mother Amy Jacques Garvey was the primary financier of the UNIA. And when I say that is when the organization was struggling at its worst, the Honorable Marcus Jacques Garvey would not hesitate to take her life insurance that was due for her if something happened to him, the thing that every woman should be entitled to, a home. He would, put the home up and take loans out on it. And in fact, one time, and he did this out of his, don't take this disrespectfully, I'm just showing the relationships, right? There was nothing he wouldn't sacrifice for nation, including her, okay? And it had an impact on her. It had an impact on her comfort level. It had an impact on the children. It affected the children's health. One of the boys, Junior, the oldest boy, ended up getting a very bad knee infection because when they went to Europe after he got exiled from the United States, and they were rebuilding what they could of the remnants of the nation from a new headquarters. And he had this big house, and he brought his secretary. Y'all talk about dedication. Can you imagine moving your secretary into the house with you, ladies? Okay, can you imagine your husband bringing the secretary home to live with and giving her the best room in the house? Now, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, God bless his soul, he was a lot like his dad. His dad was aloof. I mean, his dad had his own library. He lived separate from the family. He didn't even be bothered with people half the time. He loved reading, and he loved solitude. And, he had a little income, a little revenue that he generated. So, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, the junior, he would go into the room and read his dad's books, but he was not welcome there to stay very long. And so when he moved to Europe and they got this house, it was a 3-story house. And he dominated the first 2 levels for himself. One level was his office, and then he had the secretary and the maid, and Mother Amy got the smallest room in the house that she had to share with one bed, one little rug, and 2 boys, okay? So in his mind, you understand what we're doing. I can't make the secretary suffer. I'm not going to put her in the smallest room. That would be rude. And the maid has to have the next biggest size room because that would be right. That wouldn't be right either. So Mother Amy was expected to endure the sacrifices of the nation, right? And she did. She was long suffering. But unfortunately, as big as that house was, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey did not want to have those kids running up and down the hallways while he was doing his divine work. And so the kids were forced to stay in the room, and she would have to stay in the room with her half the time when she wasn't doing her work to keep them entertained. So it was not a very comfortable situation for her. And one time the kids were playing confined to their room, and Junior was bending down on one knee, but he didn't have his knee on the carpet. And so he ended up getting this terrible infection. God knows what the infection was. I don't know. But it almost paralyzed him, and he ended up going to the hospital. And it really was the catalyst for Mother Amy, who had endured so much, what she considered, and what many of us women today would consider, and our fathers would consider to be financial abuse. In fact, she was a very intelligent and astute woman. And one time, right before he invited her and Mother Harriet Benson Davis, who was another profound woman that needs to have her own talk, he invited them to move in with her after he was separating from Amy Ashwood Garvey. And so he invited those 2 to live in the apartment with him, save money, and then they could work more efficiently together, right? And so by this time, after they had gotten married, she had already saved up because she was a smart girl. She had saved up about $425, I think, or $325. And there was this brother from the NAACP who was courting the UNIA. And that brother told the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, I'll take the position, but you got to pay for my whole transition from the South to the North and give me a place to stay in this. And so the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, first sign of what was to come, came to her and said, can I get that $325 or $425? And she loaned it to him, but she never got it back. And that would be the story of her financial dynamic with him, that there was nothing that she could not be prepared to sacrifice for the nation. So life insurance, the house would be put up, if he needed a printer. Whenever the nation was struggling, she was struggling too, because he would go into her, this is a descriptive way, but this is what it felt like. Like imagine someone, you've already given your necklace, your earrings, metaphorically speaking,
she
right?
made a lot of sacrifices.
Right, but just that's not enough. It's like someone putting their whole arm up into your womb and just taking whatever little reserves that you have left. That's what it's like when a woman doesn't have the security of having life insurance, and even something happens to her husband, or he puts a lien on the house. because he has to get the next Negro World edition out, or the new newspaper, or the new magazine out, because he cannot fail at this mission. This mission will determine the fate of the entire race, and it was. And she knew that, so she tolerated it. But it did not come without a sense of loss. This is why she says, be not discouraged, Black women of the world, regardless of the lack of appreciation shown you, right? Does that sound like a woman who was just talking about what other women are experiencing?
Yeah, right. Carl, I'm sorry, Kelson, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you, Sheila, for this wonderful presentation on Euphemia Jacques Garvey. You have highlighted how, I guess patriarchy impacted on her and women in this period. What I'm interested in is the sisterhood. There were several prominent, important women who were on the scene at that time. People like Ida B. Wells, Anna Julia Cooper, Zora Neale Hurston. Was there a sisterhood? Did you discover any sort of connection among these women in this period?
Not directly, although there is definitely some interplay, because Zora Neale Hurston contributed to the Negro world. We know that Ida B. Wells met with the UNIA. I don't know if she met the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey personally, but he had some differences in their approach. She was not as a nationalist or a globalist. She was more focused on the issues that are, affecting African Americans right now, which is understandable. She's in the heart of Memphis, Tennessee. What was their paper called? Tennessee, Memphis Free Speech, right? So then you had, of course, Henrietta Benton Davis, who she did have a relationship where they actually lived together at some certain points. But it's connecting the dots on this is really, really interesting. I know she did meet, I believe, there's a picture of her sitting with Sonia Sanchez and another sister while she's an older woman. And it looks like they're in her house somewhere either in Harlem. She has a house in Harlem, and I went to the building, and the building is still there. They lived on the 6th floor. That was the story I was about to tell you when I realized it was like almost 6 o'clock. And I went there and I was like, oh my God, this is the exact address. And I was trying to get into the room. But ironically, the 6th floor is still there. But guess what? It's the only floor that's not habitated. And I'm confident that one of those 2 apartments, if it might even just be one, is the apartment that her and the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey lived in when they were in Harlem. That is incredible history right here. But she doesn't speak much about relationships with other women. There are some insights that I have seen where she has a little bit of a problem with 2 women in particular who come to live in Jamaica as secretaries from the U.S. that are a little bit problematic. Not that there's anything going on romance-wise, it's just there is a little bit of distrust, disrespect, and a little bit of a disconnect. Remember, she used to be the personal secretary, and then he brought in these 2 young ladies, and the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's older sister, and he managed those girls. There wasn't anything inappropriate going on. It was just a lack of sisterhood there that was very clear, and I believe Mother Amy Jacques Garvey felt very slighted and disrespected by these young ladies. So there's this kind of undercurrent. I know that she often complained about women not responding to her pleas for pieces. She would even say, listen, you don't have to be a writer. Just tell me what your thoughts are and we will edit it for you. Just let us know you're listening, let us know you're reading, let us know you care. We've got to let these men know that we can think, especially in early 1900s Jamaica. Black men didn't want to hear about no women in leadership, right? It was pretty cutting edge, the things that she was saying. You know who I think, if there's such thing as reincarnation, I suspect, and this has been my fear for quite some time, I suspect that Mama Amy Jacques Garvey might have been the spiritual equivalent, let's just say, of Maria Stewart. Y'all know who Maria Stewart is, right? She was the female counterpart of David Walker, who wrote David Walker's Appeal, the Indian war cry, if you will, or the African war cry that kind of set the entire nation in motion, that may have even triggered the Nat Turner Rebellion, that may have even inspired Frederick Douglass to take up the mantle of fighting for his freedom in the way that he did. So David Walker is another unsung hero who I believe is purposely understated because he wrote this incredible piece before he was assassinated, but they say he died suspiciously is how they report it. But the piece that he left us, I would encourage you all to read it. Well, there was a woman who supported David Walker and who wholeheartedly believed in it after her husband died, and who was a very prominent businessman, Black businessman, had some white business partners, and after his death, they basically sabotaged her inheritance and left her destitute. And so she fought, but she fought by taking her message of liberation and Black liberation to the masses. She was the first, essentially first, arguably first, if you will, real Black public speaker. And I think one of her first major contributions took place at Franklin Hall, the Franklin Hall 1 or something like that. And so she was kind of one of the first people to challenge Black men in what they need to do. And I pick up a lot of that from Mother Amy Garvey. It's a very loose connection and even more arbitrary when you try to bring in the spiritual. But I think she was maybe a student of Maria Stewart, and Maria Stewart was certainly a lone walker because she had a religious message and she had a message of liberation. And Black people were not interested in hearing that kind of talk from a Black woman, especially challenging Black men to stand up and be men. Oh, Mother Amy Garvey was very much criticized for the things that she was saying about Black manhood. But you guys got to be fair. You're thinking about this kind of soft political age that we're in right now. Black then, everything was black and white. Everything was black and white. Pale man, Negro, the NIG word. There was no softness back then. There was no reason to be soft. There was no need for political correctness. So when I oftentimes give these speeches, I have to tell people, listen, this isn't Sheila talking. This is me telling you what was going on. Okay, so when you hear her say pale man, don't come for me. Okay, I'm just telling you what it is. It's in the book, not Sheila saying this. But if you guys get historical context, this is the way everybody talked. There were 4 races. The black race, the white race, the red race, and the yellow race. That was it. Okay. She actually has an incredible speech about the races, which is called Each Race Sees Beauty in Itself. Is really, really interesting, very entertaining. And I didn't see that question. I'll be right to that question. But then she so she was making very similar challenges to Black women, because what y'all didn't understand was that it was very difficult life back then for women, especially. When we were delivered from slavery, a lot of us were still very much enslaved mentally. And so there was a lot of challenges for Black men in the workplace and in the psychological abuse, a lot of unpacking to do. And a lot of women were left having to hang the bag. And Mother Amy Jacques Garvey is full of articles and speeches about the challenges that Black women were facing. She gave them a voice, and she was raising the social issues that many men would have preferred to have swept under the rug. But she vocalized them, and she challenged Black men. Sometimes she used words that make people upset. She referred to, the laziness, the lack of ambition. You all, fawn over these white women, but we're the ones that you should be fawning over, right? White men will create all of this for their women and subjugate people, and we are expected to go without, So she was raising these issues, and it was very unpopular. So in terms of the direct link, I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything that speaks to that. She doesn't write a lot about her personal life, but I suspect she was a very lonely woman. oftentimes, even from her own, estranged a lot of times from her own family. Because one time in Garveyism, she was describing how, you know, when she had to flee from Europe to see her oldest son, Junior, and it was a very unpopular decision, and it hurt the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. It hurt his heart so bad. He was very upset about it. But he really gave her no choice. You know, that boy was going to die. There was only so much the hospital could do. And what everybody knew he needed was sunlight. He needed the warm weather. He needed fresh air. And he was confined to that bedroom. He was not going to make it, or he would be a cripple, as she said. So she had to make a decision, and she made it like a thief in the night. You know, it was like a little bit of a conspiracy. She didn't tell a maid. And this speaks to your concern, because she didn't feel confident, and comfortable confiding even in the secretary or the maid. She like all of them. She's like, I'm out of here. You know, she just had to escape. She had to go. And it wasn't for her. Remember, most Black women in movements like this that are going through these Mother Betty Shabazz type of events and Mama Coretta Scott King type of events, they're very long suffering. But there is a line that Mother Jacques Garvey was willing to draw, and it was with her son, because that was the next Marcus Garvey for her. That was where she drew the line. So she made a decision that hurt him, that defined the rest of their relationship. And, you know, the fact that she couldn't confide in the sisters that were living in the house with her says that she didn't feel confident that they would protect her.
It's so funny that you mentioned the Marie Stewart. Just yesterday I read an article about her. I shared it in the chats. Timing is everything, right?
She was interesting. She was interesting. Yeah. Her story is really interesting too.
Yeah.
Anything
Somebody asked in the chats, did you see yourself or anybody else writing a biography about Miss Garvey?
I so want to write for biography. I feel like it would be killer. Like, but I haven't been given access to her son, which I think he has something that I need. And for some reason, nobody just really wants to introduce me to him. I have met him in person before he came to DC to promote his book. I got to ask him about the book. I wasn't too excited about his answer about why he edited the book. He didn't seem to really want to explain his decision, and I didn't like that. But everybody walks very carefully around him because he is special. He is a symbol for us of the reality that there really was a Marcus Messiah Garvey, and they don't care so much about the fact that there was an Amy Jacques Garvey lie, but they really don't care that much. But I mean, I've heard people talking, you know, I've even heard him talking, and sometimes I'm like, he doesn't know his mama's contribution to the nation. It's like, my dad. And I'm like, your dad?
Just what you need, another project, right?
Yeah, so I just think it's just a culture. It's just a culture. We gotta do that.
Yeah. Does anybody else have, I'm trying to look at the chats real quick to see if did you want to drop some information in the chats? I put your contact information earlier, but you might want to put it in there again. I see somebody said you have to come back for a part 2.
Oh yeah, that would be great. I'm looking. Okay, can you see it? And do you or okay, that's right. I would love to write a biography about it. I feel like I owe her one, to be honest. But like I said, I've been writing like this whole notebook here. I'm slightly obsessed with the woman. Like this whole notebook here is full of notes and commentary and articles and things like that about her that I've just been collecting and thinking about and stuff. But I wrote, here's something that you can write. If you text the word Amy to the number 202-952-6123. I mean, a small contribution.
Say it again. 202
952-6123. So I got the editor of the African magazine to agree to let me do a 3-part series on Queen Mother Amy Jacques Garvey, right? And I was like, oh, I'm about to set the world on fire. When they read this, I'm going to be called to speak and invited to colleges. No, but I was sending the letter to everybody I could at the UNIA. nobody read this article. So I was like, I'm not writing the other two. I have written the other two parts, but I never published them. So I said, well, you know what? I'll just save it and then I'll work on the book on it. But I'm working on so many different things. It's kind of been put to the back burner. And like, again, I feel like there's some access to information that I just, it always seems aloof, like I can't get it. Like there's something that belongs to her that I think is the key to unlocking the information that I want to reveal about her. But I will tell you this, somebody, thank God, at one of the universities, and I don't know how this happened, but before the grace of God, somebody gathered all of her, or at least about 244 of her writings from 1923 to 1928, and they put it in this compilation. He's out of Long Island University. And I'm like, I want to know who this guy is. His name is Louis J. Parascandola. Like, how did this come? I was struggling to find pieces of information, and then it's just like, boom, it just landed in my lap. And no lie, it was like midnight, and I used to keep going on to Amazon, because you can get a poster of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, you can get a poster of this one and that one. There's no decent poster of just Mother Amy Garvey, right? So I would go periodically to Amazon and I would type in Amy Jacques Garvey because I wanted to add her to my wall of ancestors. So this was like really late one night. It was like maybe like 12:30 or 1 in the morning. And somebody said, type in Amy Jacques Garvey in Amazon. And when I did, this popped up, and it had never popped up before. And maybe it was just because it hadn't been published yet. I grabbed this book like a maniac. When did he publish it? Oh, in 2016. But for some reason, it wasn't showing up on Amazon until this particular period. So this was right around the time, maybe 2019, 2020, 2021. When I found this, and that was when I was able to really get a full scope of her writings, her poetry, her analysis, and he divides the articles up into categories like political topics or her early writings, her essays. When she's got a whole beautiful piece on when she would started traveling with the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey as his wife, and she just creates these beautiful pieces of imagery, like they were on the train headed across the country. And when they got there, the people just were waiting for them in waves of the hundreds. This is what it was like wherever the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey went. They would be waiting, and as soon as they stepped off the train, little red-headed white boy goes, Garvey in town! He's reading his newspaper, Garvey in town! Garvey! So she writes it like that, so you can kind of feel what was happening. And this is what she's taking in with her eyes, the excitement, the glory, the majesty of the people when they would come into town, and how they would pick him up and lift him up on their shoulders and escort him to the car and give her flowers. I mean, it was like the president and first lady were coming to town. Like, it was the event, okay? Like, yo, we missing out on history. That's why I'm kind of excited that we're having to have this discussion about our own history, because we've never gotten this portion of the story. This should be a whole course, because everything she did contributed to the entire layout of the way the nation itself would unfold. UNIA, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, and Mother Amy Jacques Garvey, because when they got him arrested, they thought that was it. We got the tiger on the loose. The tiger is no longer on the loose. He's caged. This is going to come to a complete and total halt, and nothing stops, because the tigress is still on the loose. That's a great way to end.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize I was muted. Thank you. Was somebody saying something? I'm sorry. Okay, that was you, Sheila. I'm still having audio issues, y'all. I'm sorry. This is difficult for me. Does anybody have anything that they want to share? Sheila, please share your contact information, how people can get in touch with you. Those of you who have organizations, I implore you. I know Black History Month is over, but Black History Month, Black History is at 365. I'm sure that Sheila would love to come out and do a presentation for your organizations, and you can talk to her about that. I'm speaking for her. I hope she doesn't mind. Um,
No.
and she'll give you the information on how to get in touch with her. But this has been really inspiring. I certainly did not. I learned a lot of new stuff, and ironically, there I read about Maria Stewart yesterday, and you mentioned her today. So nothing is by accident. um, let's see. I see another comment in the chat. Yes, it's Black History Month, and ladies, remember that tomorrow is um a day of rest for Black women, which is also the day of the day that Harriet Tubman passed on March 10th. Oh, 1822. I think that's the right year. No, that's not the right year. Um, I'll tell you in a minute. But anyway, her birthday they're not sure of, which was 1822, I'm sure. And then she died on March 10th. Um, and I'll have to look and see what year. But tomorrow's a day of rest for Black women, so we're encouraged to do that. Whatever rest looks like for you, make sure you do that tomorrow in honor of yourself, in honor of Black History Month, in honor of Harriet Tubman, in honor of all the Amy Garveys of the world. So yeah. All right, so Sheila just
So,
dropped her information for you all in the chats. Make sure that you make note of it and reach back out to her. And of course, you can always reach out to me, and I can pass it on to you as well if you didn't get it here.
yeah.
Sheila, any and I don't want you guys to leave. I want us to hang out for a minute so we can talk about acts of resistance and things that happened last week, because we want to end every program going forward on a positive note about what we're doing to protect ourselves. I think this conversation was very timely in light of all that's happening right now, and influential in reminding us of what we're capable of doing. We've been here before, we'll be here. I want to say we'll be here again. Let's hope this is the last time. What you think, Sheila? It keeps repeating itself. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
Can I just say one thing really quickly? I want to just thank everybody for their time and for letting me share that very important information about Mother. My goal is to make us absolutely adore Amy Jacques Garvey and call her name out when we're having these events and remember her, and to, learn more about her, and to, acknowledge her contributions and learn more about her work as well. And in case you guys didn't know, I'm also an author, and I have a book called The Divine Self-Care Strategy. I put it in there, and it would be a tremendous blessing if you all will go buy my book on Amazon to help me get ready and leave a good review. Thanks so much, sis.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm gonna take us to gallery view so that everybody let's see if I just remove the spotlights. I guess that'll do it. Yeah, so you're a busy lady. What's your consultant firm? What type of consulting do you do?
So that's where I used to primarily do strategic planning for behavioral health organizations. That's how it started off, but it evolved. I used to be like, when I graduated from law school, I couldn't get a legal job for some reason. So I would just do whatever anybody wanted. So that's how I got involved with strategic planning. But then as I started doing talks, it always just comes up very, organically. I was invited to do a talk about emergency preparedness because I was inviting women over my home to celebrate my divinity soup. This is a collard green recipe that I created when I was practicing veganism, and I still do. But I would have this incredible soul food vegan recipe, and I would show the women my emergency preparedness stuff that I had been doing since like 2010, and nobody was paying me any attention to. So when the girls remembered that I was doing it, and they were having town halls in here in Chapel Heights, Maryland, about emergency preparedness because they were scared about the events that were happening around the lockdowns and COVID. And they were like, we got to get Sheila because she knows about this stuff. So I put together a whole PowerPoint presentation, and people never stopped calling me since then. So I used my emergency preparedness, my, other trainings to do that. But my law firm, the law office of Sheila Brown, my website is there, gloriousinheritance.com. And then my work around wellness and women is the Queendom Care, where I actually make women's health and wellness products. And I have a book about the health and wellness system that I created called Total Body Alignment that talks about, ironically, Mother Harriet Tubman and how she used the 4 elements to use as a liberation tool, as well as Frederick Douglass and Dr. King, and draws very interesting parallels. So it's an interesting book, very worth the read, trust me.
Very good. Sounds very interesting. I'm going to remove our spotlights and, oops, I thought I was doing that. What did I do for you, Sheila? Hold on. I have you still on spotlight. I was trying to remove it. But anyway, I want to thank you again for coming. This is the second time, ladies. You can go on YouTube and you can find the visit when Sheila was with us in September of 2023, because now is a really good time for all of us to be thinking about our survival and what we're going to be doing, how we're going to, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get out of the, trying to get the gallery view. Yeah, so how we're going to survive these next, we don't know what's coming up. So we all need to be thinking about just what's next for all of us. So it's a good time to look at that one and take a refresher of the recommendations that Sheila gave us last 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago. So on that note, I just want to say thank you again for coming. I want us to still, like I said, stick around. Let's talk a little bit about what happened last week and how we should be taking care of ourselves. And Sheila, you're more than welcome to hang out with us, or you can, you can hang out or you can drop off, or whatever you're interested, comfortable with doing. But I have to thank you and thank you again. And hopefully, Sheila, you put your message just to me. Can you do your message again to everybody?
I did.
You just sent your contact information. It's only coming to me.
Oh,
So change,
okay. Sorry about that.
yeah, change it so that it goes to everyone so they can see that. I'm glad I caught that before you. Yeah. So anyway, folks, this has been a heck of a week. A lot has happened this week. So let's talk real quickly about that. I want us in this time to always be thinking about acts of resistance and what kinds of things can we be doing. Actually, I'm going to stop recording so we can just talk about last week. Thank you all. Sheila, you put your new information there. Good. Okay.